Welcome everybody, and thank you again for those of you that have just joined for joining us for what I believe is our 9th episode of our Geography of Hope series that we started what seems many months ago back in May. For those of you that do not know me, my name is Monica Shear. I'm the director of here at Alaska Wilderness League, and I'm very excited to see so many familiar names in the participants tonight. Just a very quick run show for you guys using Zoom so that you can have the best experience this evening. If you would like to see the speaker featured prominently in the upper right-hand corner, you can select speaker view. For any questions, you will be muted for the duration of the program. If you have any questions at any time, please feel free to use the chat function. My colleague Lois will be monitoring the chat. She can help address any issues you might be having. She'll be providing links and information, and we will be doing a Q&A with our featured speaker, Hank, at the end of the program this evening. As I mentioned, Lois will be sharing some additional materials and other information. If you are not joining us from a computer, do not worry. We will be including all that information in an email along with a recording of this episode to go out tomorrow. And with that, I would like to introduce Adam Colton, our executive director here at Alaska Wilderness League, to welcome us.
Thanks so much, Monica, and just great to see so many familiar faces and some new faces, and to be part of this special community of Alaska Wilderness League friends and advocates for these incredible wild places. You know, we created this Geography of Hope series early in the pandemic to kind of create that sense of community, but also to provide some inspiration for so many of us whose lives have been disrupted and who can't get to these wild places perhaps the same way that we've been accustomed. And of course, we know that these landscapes, wild places in Alaska are incredibly inspirational. But it's not just about the inspiration themselves, right? We're all in this because we believe these places are worth fighting for. They're truly, they don't protect themselves. And I've been really kind of heartened by the activism and the energy from so many of you. And we really are seeing that firsthand and some real results of that. And it's worth taking just a moment before we get into our program to just acknowledge what an extraordinary number of days we've had. One of our earlier Geography of Hope features was focused on, actually we've had two that have been focused really on salmon, and in particular a lot of discussion about the Pebble Mine. Some of you were able to join us for the movie The Wild, and others of you for Amy Gulick's extraordinary book, The Salmon Way, which touched on the importance of salmon in Alaska. And we've also talked about salmon in the trees, which is focused on the Tongass. So we've had a lot of discussion about salmon and about the Pebble Mine in the past. And we had some incredible news this week. With the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the Trump administration has substantially pulled back on its plans to advance the mine. They've raised all kinds of new permitting hurdles and mitigation requirements on proponents of the mine. Depending on the outcome of the elections in November, this could have the effect of really scuttling it. It's by no means dead. There's still work to do, but we saw events where Donald Trump Jr. spoke out against it, Tucker Carlson and other conservatives. But I think, it'd be a mistake to give credit in any way to just them. This was because of many of you weighing in. It was because of fishermen in Alaska, many terrific conservation partners that we work with, like Trout Unlimited, Salmon State, so many others. So just a tremendous amount of thanks and appreciation for us, for all of you who have weighed in on that really heartening development. We also saw this past week the Department of Interior, in less good news, actually move forward with its plans to attempt to advance oil drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And we've been telling you and telling our whole kind of community to get ready for this. We knew that they have every intent of trying to have a lease sale before the end of the year, but we've wasted no time. We've already The Alaska Wilderness League and our partners have already filed litigation. We're in Alaska District Court. We think we have a very strong case. There are many ways that this administration has sidesteps the science, environmental laws like the National Environmental Policy Act, the Endangered Species Act, and even the Tax Act that supposedly authorized drilling. They've short-circuited that. They've not done the right consultation with the indigenous people in Alaska, with the Gwich'in Athabaskan people in particular. So we think we're really in a strong position in court, and again, really heartening to see all the backlash. Nearly 2 million people have weighed in at different stages of the fight for the Arctic Refuge, at the various stages of the EIS comment process. So really terrific and heartening to see the people standing firm. And we really believe, and we're more emboldened than ever, that we're never going to let them in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Got a strong litigation. We've got legislation that's passed the House. We've got 24 international banks that have said they're not willing to finance any drilling, leasing activities in the Arctic Refuge. So again, thanks to all of you, tremendous campaign and a lot of excitement. We don't have any news yet on some other rollbacks in Alaska. We've been warning that they're going to be trying to finalize the environmental process to exempt the Tongass National Forest from roadless protections. We're still expecting that could be forthcoming in the weeks ahead. We're taking a close watch on that. We have gone to court also this week to challenge leasing in the Western Arctic. You know, Debbie Miller, who we're going to turn it to next, has written another one of her great books on the Western Arctic in the National Petroleum Reserve in these special areas. Well, the administration is not only trying to drill in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, but they're attempting to roll back protections for special places like Teshepuk Lake and the Uticok Uplands and Seaglick Lagoon and more. So these are places that we're litigating against. We also believe we have a strong case and hopefully to restore those protections fully in the months ahead. So with that quick update, and by the way, some of you may have questions about some of those issues. We'll see if we have time at the end, but if at any point you have questions about any of the latest of what's happening in Alaska, feel free to put your questions in the chat and we can answer them. But with that, let me turn it over to one of Alaska Wilderness League's founding board members, award-winning authors of many books on wild Alaska, including some incredible children's books that my kids grew up on, and just one of the most incredible advocates for wild Alaska, and also fittingly Richard Nelson, Nels' longtime partner, Debbie Miller.
Well, hi, everybody. Thank you, Adam. Appreciate all that you've done, especially this week. Everybody at the Alaska Wilderness League has been working very hard, and it's nice to see us going forward with litigation and doing all we can to protect places like the Arctic Refuge. I'm actually sitting in Nels's home, Richard Nelson's home, and I'm looking out over Sitka Sound, and I'm on the ancestral lands of the Tlingit people. It's a beautiful, beautiful view of the Sound and islands that are of the Tongass National Forest that are right out the window, and in the backyard, deer and bears and these beautiful Sitka spruce and hemlock trees. So I'm surrounded by the beauty of the Tongass. Really, really grateful for Hank Lentfer for doing what he has done over the last 7 years and longer, as far as writing the book about Nels. But going back, just a personal note, I first got to know Hank back 20 years ago when he was working on a lovely book of essays to protect the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, Circle of Testimony, a wonderful, wonderful contribution. And Hank has had a long time conservation strong ethic, and he's an advocate for wilderness of Alaska. He loves it because he's born and raised here. You know, spent time living as a little kid up in Barrow when Nels first arrived up in the Arctic. Let's see, Hank, you were like 3 years old or something, right? Living in Barrow. So Hank goes way back. I knew his dad. His dad actually helped me with a polar bear book that I wrote. And he's a fine writer. This is not his first book. He wrote a wonderful memoir, Faith of Cranes. Maybe some of you have read this book. And if you want to get a sense of what it's like to live near Glacier Bay National Park and raise a family there and the beauty of that place, this is a wonderful book. But the one that is so close to my heart, that Hank worked so hard on, I got to know Hank a little better when we camped together in Glacier Bay National Park back in 2013, when they first started discussing around the campfire, Hank and Nels, the idea of collaborating on a biography, and really got to see the special friendship Hank and Nels had and love of each other through their love of nature and working together as sound recording partners, going out in the field, listening to beautiful birds, humpback whales blowing out in the Glacier Bay, and just to see that love they had together and friendship, it really shines through this work, this biography, that cherished friendship of these two wonderful men. So I'm grateful for you, Hank, for writing this book. And let me tell you, it took a lot of work. 7 years. I watched him go through all these file boxes of journals and black and white photos and old slides and oral history tapes and personal letters back and forth with his family in Wisconsin. He looked through all of these thousands of pages of notes and then interviewed people and really brought Nels to life and his love for wild places in Alaska and the voices of wild places in Alaska, and also his desire to protect what we have here and his work as an advocate. So all of that came through. Thank you for writing it, Hank. I'm going to pass it over to you now, and really grateful for your work on this. Thanks.
Thank you, Debbie. And thanks for Alaska Wilderness League for hosting me today. I live near Sit-E-T-G-E, the bay where the ice used to be. It's the home of the Hunakau. So I'm grateful that I get to be on their lands. It's a beautiful place to live. And you'll see a few photos of it later on. As Debbie mentioned, this project I got involved with 20 years ago. So 20 years ago, right now, we were in the throes of another really tough presidential campaign. It was Bush versus Gore. And, it's hard to imagine how different the world would be if Gore had won. And I couldn't imagine the world getting any darker after Bush did win, and in some ways, honestly, it has, right? I mean, it's just this last president is worse than any of us could have conceived, really. And as you remember, that campaign 20 years ago was not decided in November. It dragged on. It was decided by the Supreme Court in January. And I will never forget the day that decision came down about not recounting Florida votes. I turned off the radio. It was late in the day in Alaska. I walked down the path from my house and I picked up my splitting maul. And fortunately, I had a couple truckloads of rounds I just dumped next to my path, and I started splitting wood. And it got dark. I went back to the house. I got my headlamp, and I just kept splitting wood. I got blisters, and finally the headlamp on my battery died, and I had to put my maul down. And it was just such a devastating day because I knew so many places that I and so many other people loved would immediately be under assault, and that was true. And but rather than just start drinking whiskey and stay in my house, I called a good friend in Sitka, Carolyn Servid, and we pitched this idea of gathering voices in support of the Refuge. And the Refuge is it's literally 1,000 miles outside of my home range. I'm a homebody down in Southeast Alaska. But I knew that's where they were going to start, so that's where I would start too. And so Carolyn and I sent an invitation out to writers, Debbie, among many others, Barry Lopez, Wendell Berry, Sarah James. The first one to write back was Bill McKibben within 24 hours. So Carolyn and I knew, okay, here we go. 7 weeks later from the time Carolyn and I sent a letter out, I was in the Alaska Wilderness League office in DC with Cindy Shogun, and the box of books arrived. So it went from concept to publication in 7 weeks. And Nels joined me, as did Sarah James, Bill McKibben, and my good friend, the writer Scott Sanders. And the folks at the Wilderness League were so great. I was clueless. I'd never been to DC before. And Cindy literally tied my tie for me, and Dustin literally cleaned my shoes, as well as pointed us in the right direction, set up all these meetings. We gave a copy of that book to every member of Congress. And we managed to have fun. I remember playing foosball in the Alaska Wilderness League office, and Nels and I, I'm sure, were a little disruptive to the people trying to work there, but we so needed that, that diversion from what we were up to. And that week of run-in halls culminated in a meeting with Senator John Kerry. There's a camera crew there, and he was, you know, he had presidential ambitions at the time. And those folks I just mentioned were all there: Bill, Nels, Sarah, and Scott. And I've been in touch with all those folks since that gathering 20 years ago in DC. And I know you all are as well. And, you know, Sarah is still calling out for help in protecting her homeland. Bill is still a ferocious writer. He has written more words about climate change than any other human on the planet. And just this morning, I read a review of a book in the New York Times that Bill did. It's a book called 130 Degrees. I'm just going to read a couple paragraphs from Bill's review. If we stay on the current business as usual trajectory, we could see 2 degrees as soon as the early 2030s, 3 degrees around mid-century, 4 degrees by 2075. If we're unlucky with positive feedbacks from thawing permafrost in the Arctic or collapsing tropical rainforests, then we could be in for 5, even 6 degrees by century's end. It's an aggressive reading of the available science, but it's not outlandish. And it implies an unimaginable future. 2 degrees will not be twice as bad as 1, or 3 degrees 3 times as bad. The damage is certain to increase exponentially, not linearly. At 2 degrees, elevated temperatures, scientists are now confident, we will see an Arctic Ocean free of ice in the summer. He's never been one to shy away from the hard and unwavering truth of atmospheric science. So another guy that was there 20 years ago, my friend Scott Sanders, he recently sent me this book, The Way of the Imagination, just recently published. And I want to read. So one of the premises for this book is that we humans are incredibly well adapted to protect ourselves from danger that's right in front of us. So we get that surge of adrenaline, and we will pull a child out from danger, we will, put of us now, which is a radical change in behavior to avert something that is not immediately in front of us. And Scott speaks to that challenge in this book. He writes, caring for strangers who may be separated from us by a gulf of time or space, by religion or race, or by some other seeming barrier, requires the active form of empathy we call compassion. It requires us not merely to hurt when others hurt or rejoice when they rejoice, but to alleviate their suffering if we can, and to foster their happiness, even if these efforts cost us money or time, even at the risk of our own comfort or safety. What we become, what we make of ourselves and our world will be shaped by many factors, but none more powerful than imagination. So if everybody in Senator Kerry's office 20 years ago, Nels is the only one no longer with us. But fortunately, he left so much behind. And he left me this. Which used to hang on his office wall, and it now hangs on mine. It's the front leg of a deer that was shattered into several pieces and then healed. So this animal lived for who knows how many years, and this little shard was actually sticking through the skin. Nels found this bone on Cruzoff Island while hiking with Gary Schneider. He writes about it in The Island Within. And he kept it as a symbol of persistence. He would look at it when he was struggling with a writing deadline. And it also spoke to him, as it does to me, about the power of healing. And that the world leans towards wholeness. And it asks the questions, how can we heal our broken relationship with this planet that sustains us? Years ago, Joanna Macy described the work of conservation and healing. She said, if you imagine it as a pie chart, and there's all these people working to make our future more sustainable. And you take all the work that everybody's doing and divide it into thirds. And 1/3 of the work is what she called holding actions. It's what Alaska Wilderness League does so well. It's keeping the rigs out of the refuge. It's keeping the trees on the hillsides. It's Standing Rock. It's all the protests of Keystone. And then another third of that pie are the people working towards alternatives. We have to. It's the windmills. It's the people improving batteries all the time. And the other third are people working toward shifting our collective perspective and awareness and relationship to place. And none of these pieces will succeed without the success of the other two parts. All the actions are absolutely essential, related, and needed to each other. And it will do no good if we keep the rigs out of the refuge and the trees on the hillsides in the Tongass if we don't reduce our consumptive demands and if we don't change our relationship to place. So I've, like so many people, I've at different times in my life, I've worked on different pieces of this effort, and so did Nels. But primarily Nels worked in that third realm, the shifting of perspective and awareness. And Barry speaks to that in the foreword, Barry Lopez, in the foreword to Raven's Witness. Barry speaks about the man Levine Williams, who is a Koyukon Indian man, very important teacher of Nels who lived in Hughes. And Levine told Nels back in the 70s, remember, every animal knows way more than you do. And Barry writes, the truth of Levine's remark was both metaphorical and factual. To be patient, to pay attention to the world that is not you, is the first step in the neophyte's discovery of the larger world outside the self, the landscape in which wisdom itself abides. Other residents of the world, Levine was telling Nels, know more than we do about how to survive whatever is coming. Their investment is not in progress, but in stability. Nels's life became the passing on of this deceptively simple message about human survival. So what I want to do now is show a few slides and do a quick, just kind of a quick story of Nels's trajectory through the state. So I'm going to jump back to 1964. Nels is 22 years old. The Air Force is worried about pilots being stranded on Arctic ice. So they want a sea ice survival manual. Long story short, Nels gets the job to go and learn from the world's experts on sea ice survival, Inupiaq folks. So he goes from Madison, Wisconsin to Wainwright, Alaska. And I'm going to share my screen here. So when Nels got there in 1964, it was still a dog team economy. There was no snow machines yet in town. And it was a hands-on life. This is where all the fresh water came from. You just cut blocks from freshwater lakes and stored them in ice cellars. And it was a tough community to integrate into. Nels arrived unannounced. People were suspicious of him. And this young man, Norman Matameluk, was a friendly kid who welcomed Nels early. Actually, on the first day he arrived, and it was a tough several months integrating into this community for Nels. But this man, Tagaruk Bodfish, was central to Nels being comfortable. This man lived immediately next door to Nels and came to his house every day, began to teach him the language. And this was fall time. The ice was not yet, the sea was not yet frozen. Nels was very anxious to get out and start learning about sea ice. That was his job. So with Tagaruk's help, he began making tools. This is an Unok tool used to test ice thickness. This is a monok used to toss over a floating seal that's been shot in open water and then bring it back to the ice edge. And finally, the ice froze up and Nels was able to go out onto the ice pack with the men. I'm just going to read a couple sentences here from Raven's Witness. So gulak refers to a freshly frozen apron of ice. It's thin enough to shine black with the sea underneath. Seals can push through it to get a breath. It bends and then breaks beneath the weight of a man. It is here at the border between predator and prey that the genius of Richard's Inupiaq neighbors comes fully into focus. So here's somebody tossing a monok to retrieve a seal. So that thin ice is incredibly dangerous, and the only reason people would go is because that's where the food was. And when missteps are lethal, it it sharpens your focus and steepens your learning curve. And it was a steep curve. I'm going to read another section here. Richard never witnessed a conversation that did not, in due time, circle back to hunting. Every exchange, whether in the coffee shop or on the trail, drifted to the whereabouts of seals or caribou, the conditions of ice, the habits of dog, or the proximity of bears. Richard came to see the men's single-minded focus as the engine of a brilliant, churning intellectual machine, a machine set in motion in the sod houses and ice shelters of their ancestors, a machine combining individual observations to produce insights unavailable to any single hunter. So here's Nels, he's probably 23 in this photo. And when I think about Nels's description of that dangerous place, and I think about where we are as a human community on this planet, and our missteps are now lethal. There are hundreds of thousands of climate refugees around the country, and my hope is that the somber reality of the choices we make in the next 10 years will sharpen our focus, steepen our learning curve, and stir our imagination to take risks, to try things we haven't before. All right, I'm going to jump ahead 10 years. This photo is in the mid 1970s. Nels has a master's degree, a PhD. He's published 3 books, turned down, quit 4 jobs. This is his 3rd team of dogs. In this photo, he's mushing with friends from the Kobuk Valley across Dalkey Pass towards the Koyukon. And he staked those dogs alongside this cabin, which belonged to Stephen and Catherine Atla in Huslia. And in the background there, that's the Koyukon River, which flows into the Yukon. And this is Stephen and Catherine, who became Nels's most important teachers and also surrogate parents. It was a really close and tender friendship relationship that lasted until Catherine and Stephen both died. So I'm going to read another short passage here. This is Nels's words from Make Prayers to the Raven. We often remember ancient or traditional cultures for the monuments they left behind, the megaliths of Stonehenge, the temples of Bangkok, the great ruins of Machu Picchu. People like the Koyukon have created no such monuments, but they have left something that may be unique, greater, and more significant as a human achievement. This legacy is the land itself, enduring and essentially unchanged despite having supported human life for countless centuries. So I can figure out how to do it. So I'm going to stop my share. So Nels left Huslia with a very deep hunger for a home of his own, and he landed in Sitka, and eventually in the home that Debbie is sitting in, and he had a very intentional, intense love affair with the rainforest island, and he just wanted to see whether the glimpse of the lifeways and relationships that he saw both in the Arctic and in the interior, whether he might be able to replicate those in some forms for himself. And here's a passage from his own journal after years of being in Sitka, and he's writing about the island now, and this is from his desk. I pick up the binoculars several times each day to look at the island, as if I'm reaching over to touch a person I love and to be touched in return. I look at the island and think, I'm doing this for you. This is such a wonder, loving a place as if it is another person. How strange to have reached my age without ever living in a way that allowed it. I have certainly read of it, have lived with people who premised their whole existence on it, but I was not raised in a culture or community that allowed it to happen to me. There is only one way to know this love. Go to the land, become rooted, and let the love grow through intimacy and completeness of experience. And here's another short piece from one of the 8,000 journal pages I read. And this is again written while he was in Sitka. There is nothing in me that is not of earth, no split instant of separateness, no moment of existence in which a single particle sets me apart from earth. We are forgotten the most basic and elemental truth of all. Until this truth becomes intuitive again in the Western world, we jeopardize our own existence. Others have not forgotten, and we must go back to them seeking after lost knowledge. I'm going to read this one little piece again. Until this truth becomes intuitive again in the Western world, we jeopardize our existence. I think that's what Scott Sanders was reaching for in that opening passage, is we have to find ways, and quickly, to make this more intuitive in our politics, in our discourse, in our education, and our policies. 20 years ago, I remember going out for a beer with Cindy at the end of that week, running around in DC, and I asked her how she kept going. And I don't personally have this stamina to work in a place like DC. I'm way too spoiled by a life steeped in wild country. And so I was so grateful for Cindy and others that day after day did the hard work of protecting the place where I live. And I asked her how she did it, and she said, well, Hank, to be honest, I couldn't do it without people like yourself and Nels and Debbie and others that brought their stories and passion for Alaska, through the office. So what I want to do now is offer a little acoustic tour of my home ground. I know a lot of you have been unable to travel to Alaska and recharge yourselves for the hard work you're doing. So I'm going to share my screen again.
You've been raised.
So this is a little video. It's only about a minute and a half, but it's a little taste of what Nels and I did together for years, which was to go out in wild country, camp, wake up early with the sun, and just listen. We listened with the help of exquisite microphones, and we recorded. So just take a breath and enjoy this this little taste of Alaska morning. So by about day 5 of one of our recording trips, and every day would start with some version of what I just shared, but it would go for hours instead of minutes. And by about day 5, we would start to get pretty giddy, just to be immersed in beauty, that far removed from the news cycle. And at least once or twice a day, this would happen.
Oh, that hurt. Oh, God. Tears running down my face.
So now I want to share just a few sounds with you guys. I'm going to start easy with sounds that everybody's going to recognize. So that, of course, was a loon, and most everyone will recognize this sound as well. So those are sandhill cranes, which are going to start flying over my home here any day. And the peak of fall migration will be in another 2 weeks, and I'll hear that sound every day. There'll be thousands of them flying right over my home. So this is a sound I'm sure a lot of you have had the good fortune to hear. This is the grunt of caribou, and that little rain sound is their hooves. All right, now we're going to get a little bit harder. So this is a sea otter talking to its baby and then cracking a shell on its chest. That's a harbor seal. Here's another tough one. I'm gonna play that last piece again. Sounds like a lion. That's a muskox. This is a polar bear Nels recorded at night. So this next sound, well, I'm just going to play it. Here we go. So it sounds like a wave, but it is a wave of sorts. It's I don't know how many thousands of shorebirds coming at the microphone and then turning in unison. So these next, let me see, 5 quick recordings are all the different sounds that feathers make. So the sound you just heard was made by feathers. And that quick jet-like sound, I'll play it again. That is a sound of a hawk stooping right over the microphones and into a group of shorebirds. I'll play it one more time. So again, that's the sound of feathers. And this next clip is our goldeneye ducks taking off. So it sounds like that could be vocalizing, but that's all just wing whistle. So this one is swans. In about the middle of this recording, you can hear the ripple of wind through their primary feathers. And so this is the heaviest bird in North America. So the biggest wing feathers, biggest primaries. And this next recording is the smallest primary in North America, the smallest feather. Same structure, just on a really different critter. And this final little clip is, of course, ravens. And they speak with their wings as well as their voices. So I want to do one final reading from Raven's Witness. There were no worn paths of prayer that led Richard to the shores of Cruzoff Island. He boated across uncharted waters, drawn by the same yearning that compels others to light a candle or reach for a rosary. Richard went to the island seeking a spiritual path in escaping heartbreak. Hunting, surfing, and watching became his meditation, writing his discipline. The rainforest his cathedral, the deer his communion. After days, weeks, and months, rooted in the unshakable sanity of the senses, Richard was struck by the absurdity of our culture's insistence in dividing the world into separate bits: self, other, male, female, wild, tame, mine, yours. And this next part is pulled directly from his journal. He wrote, "We fail to recognize such categories are an artifice, and the customs surrounding them are pure invention. Throughout human history, the artifice of boundary has been a locus for conflict, death, and enslavement, ranging from the conflict among individuals and families to world wars. And in the recent history of our own culture, we have built a new border between humanity and the rest of creation. This may be the most dangerous and threatening boundary of all, and the most artificial." coming back to the election, imagine that what happens in November exceeds all of our expectations, and we end up being represented by politicians that reflect the actual demographics of the country. There's a balance of gender, there's a balance of skin tones. Even then, there's no thrushes singing in the Capitol Dome, and there's no one going to cast a vote with loon calls still echoing in their minds. So it's still, even when we achieve a better diversity, it's still a human echo chamber, which I'm not sure keeps the doors of our imagination open wide enough for the tasks in front of us. So in that context, I think of the role of Alaska's wildlands, not just as places for recreation, but for essential inspiration to help us arrive, to find enough imagination to change course at the pace that we need to do it. So I am so deeply thankful for all of you that work so hard to keep Alaska wild and intact, and all these voices singing. We need them like never before. I'm going to play just 2 more sounds to end. So this next sound is whales that I recorded. I was coming down Glacier Bay one fall evening. It was just dead quiet with my daughter on the boat, and these whales were just being really active. So here's what they were saying. And this last recording was made by Nels. We woke up and paddled our kayaks in different directions, and he was going to the beach to record birds, and this critter was on the beach, and he got on this microphone, and the wolf started doing this. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for all the work you do to protect my home ground. It's ground we all need. Blessings.
Thank you, Hank. That truly was hope-filled, and we greatly appreciate it in the face of so much right now. I know there's little replacement for sounds and photos and the inspiring words that you read. And so I would encourage anyone, if you have questions or there's something you want to learn more about, please feel free, throw them in the chat. Hank and I will be covering those shortly, but in the meantime, as I hope you are as inspired as I am after hearing that, I wanted to turn it over to my colleague Ariel to share how you can get involved.
Hello, I am Ariel, the annual giving manager and one of the members of the development team at Alaska Wilderness League. And Monica, if you can just put up the slide that outlines some of the different ways that you can get involved. So Adam, Debbie, and Hank have all shared some extremely important reasons for why protecting the wildest places in Alaska is so important. So I wanted to explain how you can get involved with us at the Alaska Wilderness League and our efforts to conserve these special places. So first is taking an action. Activism is so important in supporting the League's efforts, which is why we are consistently calling on our members to take actions. As you heard from Adam earlier, the record of decision last week continues the administration's push to hold the lease sale, but we also have a plan to make sure that that doesn't happen. The litigation that was filed yesterday is one step, but we must also continue to put pressure on the banking, insurance, and oil companies to show that drilling in the Arctic Refuge will be bad for business. So you can join our efforts by reaching out to Bank of America today through our action page. And you can follow the link on this slide to take that action. Next is to become a member. I actually see so many members online now, so thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who are not members, I encourage you to become a member by making a donation today. For those of you who are already members, I hope you'll consider making an additional donation to support both educational efforts like this and legal efforts like Adam explained at the beginning of the call. Without donations, we simply could not do this work. So I hope you'll join us today. The link to donate is there on the slide, and Lois can put it in the chat, and we'll also include it in the follow-up email. And if you make a donation using this link, you will get access to Zoom backgrounds featuring Alaskan lands and wildlife. So just a small thank you for making a donation and becoming a member. Finally, one more way to engage with the League is to follow us on social media. So we've included all of our social media handles right on the slide, and by signing up for those, you'll receive regular updates from actions that we're currently promoting, to matching gift opportunities, to beautiful pictures of the places that you care so much about. I know that I personally really love following us on Instagram in order to see photos of the places that our team is working so hard to protect. So we hope that you'll follow us today. I also wanted to take a moment to just thank Braided River and Mountaineers Books for their incredible partnership in conservation. And they are the publishers of Hank's book, and you can purchase that right on their website. And I know Lois can put it in the chat as well. So with that, I turn it over to Hank, who's a longtime friend and member of the League, so that he and Monica can do question and answer. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ariel. So Hank, it seems as though your sounds really hit a note with folks, not to be too punny, but there were some questions and curiosity about how you and Nels went about recording them. If you could share a little bit more kind of about the process and the equipment that was used to capture such evocative sounds, that would be great.
Yeah, our primary tools are these big parabolic dishes. I think they're 22 inches round. They're big plastic dishes that we can roll up so we can take them in the kayak with us. And there's a really great microphone in the center of that dish and a digital recorder that hangs around our neck, headphones, and we're just listening. And Nels facilitated my acoustic awakening. I've been in Alaska all my life, and he took me out when he was doing radio work. He put his headphones on me, gave me his parabolic dish and said, push this button, it will change your life. And by the time the batteries died on that recorder, I was just stunned. I was just left standing in a world I thought I knew, and it made me realize I'd been in Alaska my whole life and had never paused to fully listen. So it didn't take me long before I had one of those myself, and we ended up working together for years. We just go find the most animal-rich place, as quiet as we could find. By that I mean you're removed from human noise, and we just wake up early and record until the wind or the rain or something else shut us down.
Awesome. And then there was a question, if you have a sound library where the recordings may already be or possibly end up in, yeah, and are you still making recordings?
Yes and yes. Richard and I worked for a couple years for the Park Service building a library of sound, primarily in Glacier Bay. We did some work up in Denali as well. Those sounds are all publicly available. They're all cataloged with Cornell University. Park Service has copies, and I, of course, have them all too. And I always love what Nels would say when somebody approached him and would ask if they could have some of his recordings, and if so, how much they cost. And he would always say, I will charge you exactly what the thrush charged me. And in that spirit, I am happy to make any and all of these recordings available. If they can be of use to anybody in conservation work, if they can just make your home life more pleasant by having a soundscape to turn on, just reach out directly and I can send them to you.
Well, that is wonderful. Thank you. Especially for those of us that do not probably have your patience to sit until you get to hear the sound, such as myself. There was a question, if you could share a little bit more from what you touched on in the beginning with Nels and his project and what brought him up from Wisconsin to Wainwright and his exposure to some of the indigenous cultures in Alaska.
Well, as I mentioned briefly, he got this job, and it was kind of a fluke. He was interested in snakes at the time, but he's had this intense curiosity in the natural world. A professor noticed that as a standout, offered him this job. He took it because he also had a sense of adventure. And what he found in Wainwright was a community in which every single member was an astute naturalist. And he didn't know that was possible. He was kind of a freak as a kid because he was so enamored by critters. And to realize that there are communities where every single person is a naturalist just blew his mind. So it was an intense, lonely year, but at the same time, it was a homecoming. And that year just sent him on a trajectory to try and experience it more, find it for himself. So he did a PhD project in Chalkitsik, living with Wichin folks. And then he got contracts with the Park Service through the D2 days. And that's what got him into a bunch of other interior villages.
Amazing. We just had a question that if someone wanted to start recording nature, what would your advice be in terms of how to get started and equipment they might need? So
everybody listening here probably has all the equipment they need to get started. There's a voice memo function on your phone, and it's great. You can buy a little microphone that plugs in your phone, get a little bit better. But you don't have to travel 2,000 miles to get to deeply wild country to do this. There's a robin singing in every state in the country in the spring. And you won't have to go far to find one in a city park. And record it, and then walk until you find another one, record that one with your phone. Listen to them, and you will be amazed that you can distinguish between this bird and that bird. Their songs are that distinct. You just give it a little bit of attention. And then listen again next year, and you'll know whether it's the same individual coming back to that city park or not. So start with the close at hand, start with what you thought was familiar, listen closely, and recording is just a gimmick. It's like a sketch for an artist. It just helps them see more, and recording just helps you listen better. So it doesn't take much. The equipment we're using is expensive, but you don't need to spend $2,000 to get set up to do this.
That is terrific advice, and I do appreciate how you've really brought the messages home of needing to listen and to understand and to get feedback from sources that are, beyond ourselves, especially as you were talking about Congress. And I did love the suggestion that someone just popped up that your sound should be the background music in the Capitol Rotunda, and then maybe they will be influenced as well. So I just wanted, because I know we're a little bit over the hour, but I did just want to give you an opportunity to share some of your final thoughts about Raven's Witness. You talked a little bit about what had started it, but what would your hope be for what people would take away from the book and all the work that you put in to capture Nels?
Oh boy, I could take another hour answering that one. Let me try and be succinct. Nels gifted me so many things. And primary was he allowed me to access my own joy more than I was able to before I met the man. And Nels was a joyful man. He was an easy man to love. And I came to understand that an enduring source of his joy was the certainty of how connected we all are. So he got to a place where loneliness was an impossibility, because it's ecologically, spiritually impossible to be separate from the world's beauty in each other. And he saw that in some of his teachers. I saw it in him. He helped me achieve a bit of that for myself. So if I can, through the act of storytelling, either with recordings or through writing, offer even a little bit of that to anybody else, all the hours of work will be worth it.
Well, I have no doubt that you will, and I can see firsthand that you have tonight with the stories you've shared for everyone that was able to join us. So thank you. I really, just want to echo everything that came across in the chat. Everyone was so appreciative and moved and got to spend a little time somewhere else, which we all find very special nowadays when we might not be as free to travel. So thank you so much, Hank, for joining us tonight. Thank you, everyone that joined us and watched and participated, and for all of you who support our work through your actions and through your donations here for the Alaska Wilderness League. Big heartfelt thank you. And of course, to Debbie and Adam and Ariel for joining me tonight. And I look forward to seeing you all in a few weeks. We will have our next Geography of Hope series in mid-September, September 23rd, I believe, and we'll be joined by Dr. Stephen Amstrup, who is the lead scientist for Polar Bear International. So thank you, and I look forward to seeing you in a few weeks.
One more thing, Monica, before we sign off. I'm just thinking about, what I can offer during this time of pandemic. And when I step out my door, I'm immersed in this wild country that's so hard to get to. So if anybody out there listening would like to hear some more of this, I'm happy to make myself available. If you just have a virtual cocktail hour that you want to infuse with some wild sounds, reach out to me. I'll show up. I'll share some sounds. I'll do what I can to make this technology work for all of us, to take these wild Alaska voices and pipe them into your homes. Just reach out. Happy to do it.
That's amazing. Thank you, Hank. Don't be surprised. I'm sure you'll be hearing from a few folks that are going to have some pretty epic cocktail parties now. Well, thank you all again. And yeah, don't hesitate to reach out to myself or any of us for any help in the future, and keep fighting a good fight.
All right. Thank you.